What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be learning all about iCloud, and we're going to be building this app that you see here, which is a grocery list, of course. And we can go ahead and hit this plus button and add in a new item. Let's go ahead and add in some chips. We can hit add here. If I pull to refresh, we'll see that we get chips in our list here. This data is being saved to iCloud, and then of course we are fetching it from iCloud as well via CloudKit. So we'll take a look at how to build this, and of course, if you close and reopen the app here, you'll see that it also automatically fetches the data. We'll talk about configuring all of this good stuff from scratch. So if that sounds good to you guys, make sure you start by destroying the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Absolutely destroy it. It helps out the videos quite a bit. If you're new to the channel and into Swift and iOS, welcome. Consider hitting subscribe for daily Swift videos. That all said and out of the way, open up Xcode, get pumped. Let's talk about some CloudKit. All right, we're going to get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project here. We're going to stick with the app template under the iOS tab, and I'm going to go ahead and call this project my grocery list. Make sure, of course, your language is Swift and your lifecycle is UIKit. Go ahead and continue, save it wherever you'd like. And we're going to start here by expanding our Xcode window in a moment. There we go. We'll close this right panel. And before we write any code, the first thing we want to do is add the CloudKit capability to our project. So the way we do that is by coming up here to this tab that says signing and capabilities. We're going to hit this plus for a capability. And if you search for a cloud in here, you'll find an iCloud option. Go ahead and add it, and go ahead and check CloudKit. And actually, you can just check all of these. And the first thing you're going to notice is this little spinner here that says waiting to repair. What this is actually doing is it's actually setting up your backend in the iCloud CloudKit dashboard where you can see your data and your data schema. And that's where we're basically going to be saving our grocery items. Now, here you can also see there are a bunch of containers that I've previously created. We're going to create a new one here, and I recommend you do this in the beginning of whenever you're building your project because it does take a minute or two to show up on the dashboard. So I'm going to call this iCloud let's call it iOS example. Usually this is iCloud.yourBundleID. There's really no rule about it. Call it whatever you want, so long as you pick something unique. But once you create it, you can go ahead and hit refresh here a few times, and it'll eventually change from red to white, meaning it has created. You can also pull up this website in a browser. It is iCloud.developer.apple.com. Here are 4 different containers that I've got on the left. A container represents a database. And eventually, we're going to see the new one we created here. Once we refresh the page, it takes a moment, so just bear with it. But while it does its thing, we're going to start writing some code. So cool, so we're going to jump into our view controller. We're going to hit the run button at the top left to get our project compiling and showing up in a simulator here on the right-hand side. And let's talk about what we need. So thinking back to what we saw in the beginning of the video, we basically want a way to show a list of grocery items that we can insert and add to. And that list of items should, of course, come from our database, so CloudKit. So we're going to need CloudKit, so we should start up here by importing it, just like that. And we're also going to need a table view here, which is actually going to show our grocery items. So I'm just going to set up a very, very basic table view with this anonymous closure pattern. If you're not familiar with table views, I've got a ton of videos on them. So go ahead and take a look at those other videos on the channel. But here we are going to set this up. We are going to register a cell to it. We're just going to use the basic UI table view cell. I'll use an ID of cell here. We want to go ahead and add this as a subview and set this guy's data source to be self. We want to go ahead and also conform to the table view data source protocol. And we want to bring in the 2 required functions. So I can go ahead and hit this error and just click fix. and it'll bring them in for us like that. I really don't like that it puts them at the top, so we're going to move them to the bottom. It's a little more organized. We're going to return 0 rows just to get started. And here we are going to simply dequeue a reusable cell with an identifier of cell, since that's what we registered, and an index path. And then finally, we'll return cell here. And then eventually, once we get our grocery items fetching from the cloud database instance, we are going to want to set the text label on here. I'm just going to call it item for the time being. Let's see. We also want to give this a frame, so I'm going to override viewDid layout subviews and call super viewDid layout subviews and just give this guy a frame of view.bounds. Still need to do some UI setup. We also want to give this view controller a title of grocery list. And now our current view controller is not embedded in a navigation controller. So we want that navigation bar. So I'm going to jump to the main.storyboard here. And you can do this programmatically too, but it's just faster in storyboard. So I'm going to select this controller, come up to the toolbar and hit editor, embed in navigation controller. I'm also going to select the navigation bar up here, open up the right panel, otherwise known as the attributes inspector. And we're going to check this box for prefers large title. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run your project. And you should see nothing is crashing, but we see our grocery list title up here, looking pretty good. Now we also want to have a plus button here that we tap to show an alert where we can enter in a new item. But before we do that, let's go back to our dashboard here, just refresh, and we'll see here if we see our new container. So there it is. We have iCloud.example app. If you click on it, hopefully we don't get any warnings or anything, but it should load up the basic dashboard. And we're going to want to work in data. So let's click on data here. We haven't saved anything to this container yet, but we will do that in a moment. The other thing I'm going to call out here, which is a big thing that everybody forgets when working with iCloud on your simulator, you'll need to go to the settings app and sign in with your Apple ID. That's how iCloud identifies, what user is using it. And if you're not signed in, your iCloud stuff is not going to work. So open up settings. You can see up here that I am signed in with one of my Apple ID accounts. That all said, let's start putting that stuff together. So first, we need a reference to our database. So I'm going to say private let database is going to be a CK container dot defaults. And I just want to first talk about the 3 kinds of database containers. There is a private, public, and shared. Private is basically any data you want private to the current logged in user with their Apple ID. Public is any public data, as the name implies, for your app. And shared is like an in-between state where you can have data be private to that user, and you can also share it with others. You can think of this like sharing permissions. Now, the default container is going to be the one that matches your bundle ID. But since we went ahead and used a different name, if we come back to our project navigator, it looks like we called it iCloud.iOS example. We want to use that identifier to create the container. So I am going to create this with an identifier of iCloud.iOS example. And this is case sensitive, so just be careful that you type it in correctly. And then from this, we are going to grab the public container, or public cloud database, I guess is what it's called. And basically, we're going to write another function where we are going to save in grocery items into our container. So let me do that right below viewDid load here. We're going to say Objective-C func save item with a name. It'll be a string. And what we are going to do in here, it's pretty simple, actually. We're just going to say database. We want to save a CK record. And this record is basically, of course, the thing that we're going to save. We're going to create it in a moment. It's going to be a record. And this completion handler will return to us a record optional as well as an error optional in case something goes wrong. And in here, what we're going to say is if record does not equal nil and your error is nil, we are just going to print out saved, just like that. And let me go ahead and create this record so this error goes away. A CK record represents any record in CloudKit. It's really simple. We're just going to say CK record, and we're going to create it with a record type. And the record type is basically, you can provide a string of whatever the record type name is going to be. I am going to call it a grocery item. And then on this record, we can set additional properties with set value for key. So I'm going to say the value we're setting is the name, and the key we're going to set it for is name. So pretty simple. If you hit Command B, you should be compiling. Like I said, we need that plus button up here, so that'll be the way that we end up calling this function. So let's go ahead and add that navigation bar button. It is going to be navigation item. That's not what we want. Navigation item, right bar button item. It'll be a UI bar button item. And the initializer you want takes a bar button system item of style add. Target will be self, and the action will be a selector of did tap add. We need to go ahead and create this function now. So I'm going to create it right here. And when the user taps on this button, we want to show an alert with a text field. So I'm going to create an alert controller with a title of add item, a message of nil, a style of alert. We are going to want to present, of course, this alert with an animation. We are going to also want to add a text field. So we're going to say add text field with this config handler. And the only configuration we're going to apply to the field here is going to be a placeholder. We'll say enter name, ... And then we want two buttons on this alert, one to cancel it. So we're going to add an alert action here with a title of cancel, style of cancel, and a handler of nil. And then we also want one more, which is going to have a handler that actually does something. Its style will be default, and its name will be add. Now in this function here, rather in this closure for this handler, we want to basically get the text out of the fields from the alert if the user entered something, and then call this function that we wrote down below to save the item. So we are going to say if let field is alert.textfields.first, and we're going to say let text is field.text. And we're also going to make sure the text is not empty. We're going to want to put weak self here before we call a function on self. And this is going to be self.saveItem, passing in the text. So go ahead and hit Command B, and let's go ahead and try to add something to our database here. You'll notice that on the left-hand side, if we come to our dashboard, right now it's on the private database for my logged-in user. We're going to switch to public here. And right now, if I hit query, you'll see a warning that we don't have any records, which makes sense because we haven't saved anything yet. So once we go ahead and save something, we should first see in the print down here, save get called in the console, and then we should be able to refresh our console in the browser. So I'm going to hit plus. We get our alert. We're going to type in, let's type in candy, because everybody needs candy. We're going to hit add. We get saved down here, which is great. We're going to come back here and we are going to try hitting query. You might need to refresh the page. I don't think it's asynchronous. So go ahead and refresh the page here. And as soon as their dashboard decides to stop being slow, make sure this is set to public database. Go ahead and query. Let's see, there was a problem. It's trying to query a grocery item. The reason it's having a problem querying grocery item, I can actually tell you, what you need to do is you need to specify something to query on the basis of. So if you actually come to this dropdown up here and hit schema, well, first of all, we see that the dashboard has picked up grocery items, so we have saved the data successfully, but we need to specify an index to query on the basis of. So if you come to that dropdown and click schema, you want to hit this link over here that says edit indices, and we want to go ahead and add an index, and it's going to be record name, and just make sure it is queryable. That's basically how we are going to query out our different records. Go ahead and hit save at the bottom right, And let's see, I think it's saved. Once it's done doing its thing, you can switch back in the drop-down menu to data. And now you should be able to hit this query and we should see our one entry here, just like that. So looking pretty good. You'll see we have some default fields on here that the dashboard gives us, like an ID. Here's our record type, it's grocery item. We have a name called candy, which is what we entered. It has a date on it of when it was inserted and last updated. So now we can add items, so pretty darn good. Let's add in one more. We'll add in milk here. The next thing we're going to look at, of course, is now that we've got items in here, we want to query them back out and actually show them in our table view, because otherwise it's kind of useless. So we are going to write a function to do that. I'm going to put it right down here. We're going to say func fetch items. And we're going to call this at the end of view did load. Now we are also going to want an array of strings that is going to power our table view. So I'm going to say items is an empty array of strings by default. So this will be what drives our table view. Make sure it's a var so it's mutable. A number of rows for our table. Let me just go ahead and add a comment to organize this. We're going to say the number is items.count. And instead of assigning this to some random string, we're going to say this is items indexPath.row, just like that. And now let's actually talk about how to query. So querying is pretty simple, actually. We're first going to create a CK query. So we're going to say let's query is a CK query. Now we're just going to query a record type with a predicate. Record type should match whatever we called it to insert, which is grocery item down here. I recommend making this a constant somewhere so you don't have a typo. And a predicate you can use to sort out the query on basically on what basis do you want to actually query. If you want to query based on, let's say, the date, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to worry with that. So we're just going to hand in a general predicate. You can say NS predicate with the value of true. And now we just want to execute this query and get our results out. So we're going to say database, and I believe it is perform, and we want to find the function that says perform query. There are a bunch of different performs on here, so you just have to go through them one by one, which is slightly annoying, but there it is, perform query. First one is your query. Zone, we're not going to worry about, so go ahead and pass in nil. And your completion handler is going to hand you back an array of CK records. So we'll say records here, and it's actually optional, so we'll need to unwrap it, as well as an error if something goes wrong. Now we are also going to want to say weak self here because we'll assign it to the property of items. Now in this closure, we're going to say guard let records equals records, and error is nil. Otherwise, we'll return. And now what we want to go ahead and do, and before we actually do it, let's just go ahead and print out records so we can all see what we're getting back. If we go ahead and give it a run in our console here, we should see when the app boots up, we should get 2 records printing out, which are kind of verbose, but we in fact do. Here is the first one, and down below is the second one. And if we kind of look through all this text here, you'll see the name is Candy for the first one. Second one is Milk. So instead of actually putting the record into our items here, we just want to get the name of the entry that we made. So we are going to say here self.items is records.compactMap. And from each record, we want to say $0, and we want to get the value for the key of name. So we're going to say value for key of name, just like that. And let's see, we'll have an error because it's trying to cast it to any. So here I'm going to say this is a string. Right now we're still printing it. Actually, we're not printing it, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and say print self.items just to make sure we're now printing out an array of those items. And we, in fact, are. It's an array of candy and milk. You'll notice it's optional because it's self-optional. But now that we've assigned items here, we want to just go ahead and refresh our table view. So we'll say table view reload data. Now this is a UI call, so we're going to take both of these things and do it on the main thread. So we get a update properly on the main thread UI. So go ahead and give it a run, and we should now see our entries here. Boom, just like that, candy and milk. Now, one other thing that you might want to do is once you've entered in a new item in this save function, you might want to go ahead and actually call this refresh. Now, one important thing to call out is that iCloud sometimes isn't super fast. So sometimes if you try to call something and do a fetch immediately, if you insert then fetch immediately, sometimes it won't show up because it takes a second or two. So we might have to put this in a delay block, but once we enter something, we definitely want to refresh it automatically because otherwise it's kind of a bad user experience. So here I'm going to add in a new item. Let's go ahead and say chicken. We're going to hit the add button, and you'll see that it called fetch, but it actually didn't refresh here. But if I go ahead and just run the app one more time, you'll see that we should see chicken in there now. Yep. So one way that you can solve this, just pretty trivial, is just delay the refresh call. We'll say dispatch queue main async after now plus, let's say, I don't know, 2 seconds. Let's see if that works. We can always bump it up if we need to. Let's go ahead and add something. Let's see, we definitely need chocolate bars. Keeping with our candy theme, we're gonna hit add. And in 2 seconds, it should refresh. It looks like 2 seconds was not in fact enough. So the other thing we'll go ahead and do is I'll quickly add a pull to refresh on our table view, which is pretty simple. So on our table view here, before we add it, we're going to create a control for it. So a control is going to be a UI refresh control, and we are going to create this just like that. And on this control, we are going to add a target of self, let's see, an action of selector. This is going to be that not save item, it's going to be that fetch items, and the event will be value changed. You'll need to prefix fetch items with objc since it's a selector. And then now we just want to add this to our table view. So we'll say table view refresh control is our control. So now when we pull down to refresh, we should be able to get the new items showing up without having to close and open the app. So let's go ahead and add in a new item. Let's do something a little longer. We'll say super good fried chicken. Let's go ahead and give this an add. We see it didn't show up. We're going to hit refresh. And not yet, not yet. Give it a moment. Still not refreshing. The reason it's not refreshing actually is because we never actually told the table view to reload, I believe. So we're calling fetch items. We are going to say table view start, I believe it's begin update actually. Begin updates, just like that. And at the end here, we are going to say self.tableview end, or let's see, updates. I think it's finish updates, something like that. Self.tableview.end updates. And let's see, we are definitely performing the query here. So let's see what's going on. All right, we're definitely inserting. All right, it looks like we are crashing now because we're not actually updating on the table view. So let's go ahead and pass in a parameter here. And we will say, let's actually be lazy, and for the sake of time, we're going to create another function for updates. So I'm going to get rid of this begin updates and stop updates. And let's go ahead and call this pull to refresh. And in our refresh control, we'll go ahead and say pull to refresh here. Go ahead and give that a run. Should not be crashing now on boot, hopefully, which it's not. We'll go ahead and add in some popcorn here. We'll hit add. And if I pull to refresh, we should see it hopefully in a moment here. Just give it a few seconds. All right, definitely not wanting to show up here. All right, guys, I realized I made a silly little mistake, but I always promise not to edit out my mistakes. So here we are again. So all of our stuff up here with the refresh control was totally fine. Initially, I had done table view begin updates in our function down here, which is now what we wanted to do. We wanted to say table view refresh control begin refreshing this will actually start the refresh animation in the process. And then instead of doing table view end updates or finish updates here, we wanted to do table view, refresh control, and refreshing. And if you go ahead and take a look at it now, if you run it, if I go ahead and add in another item, we'll add in, let's do some rice. If we add this in, you'll see that it doesn't actually update by default. But if we do in fact pull to refresh, let's see, we got rice added here. Let's try one more. We'll say, whoops, we don't want dictation. We're gonna say oranges. I'll go ahead and hit add. And let's see, no oranges just yet. But if we pull to refresh, we should see oranges get added here right there. Now you'll notice that they're not in any particular order when we get them back from the query. That's what I was talking about with the NS predicate. If you wanted to, order them based on something, you could do that. You could also order the your query results by something, which we're not doing. We're just getting a result back. In a randomized. But if we come back to our dashboard here and go ahead and hit query again, you'll see all of our entries that we have added so far. And yeah, that's basically it. That's how you go ahead and save things to iCloud. That's how you configure CloudKit for your app. It's really not that hard. Keep in mind the different kinds of databases here, public, private, and shared. And the one thing we didn't cover is deleting a record. Maybe I'll quickly show that here. You can basically just say database and you can just say delete. And it'll basically tell you which initializer or which function do you want to delete with. So you can delete with a given record ID. You can delete it with a different record zone. There's a couple different deletion options. The most common is this one where you pass in a record identifier and then it just has a completion handler of it got deleted. This ID is something that you get by default on a record. In fact, it's actually shown here already to you. You have a name here, and I believe the record ID, what they use, I think, is this tag thing right here. So pretty simple to delete. So if you wanted to extend this app and play with it a little more with swipe to delete, you would just do a swipe to delete UI action and then call this deletion function just like that. So that is all I've got for you guys. If you haven't hit the like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. If you have any comments, leave them down below. Love hearing from you guys. Love hearing video suggestions. What do you guys want to see? Just comment and say hi for the heck of it for the algorithm as well. And of course, if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed yet, hit subscribe to stay tuned for daily Swift, iOS, and general app-related Apple videos. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.